Hello, Property Hubbers. I'm Rob B with Rob D, and you are listening to the podcast. Welcome. Now, Rob and I, we like to think we're right a lot, and hopefully you think that's the case too. But sometimes, over the years, over the many recordings, we have just got things wrong. So we've changed our mind, and this week you can find out exactly what we've changed our mind about.
Yeah, everyone changes their mind from time to time. The difference is we speak our mind on tape a lot. And so it's all been recorded. So that was a mistake to start with. We're now doubling down on that mistake by actually pulling them out of the archives for you. So you don't even need to go to any effort to make us look silly. We're going to do it for you. So that is coming up. But there are some important lessons that you can pull from that as well. It's not just us feeling daft. We've also got a cracking resource of the week that I'm looking forward to sharing with you, Mr. B.
I'm looking forward to that. Now, news story. We know the budget's happened, but it happened yesterday, the day before this podcast goes out. So we've recorded this in advance, so we can't comment about it. So we will talk about the budget next week. And hopefully we don't have too much to talk about. You may be laughing now as you listen to this. We'll see. But don't worry, we still have a news story and one that you should pay attention to. Rob, what have we got this week?
So this is from The Guardian, and the headline is Household Finances Under Strain as Nationwide Warns of Tough Times Ahead. So Nationwide is one of the biggest mortgage lenders in the country. So when their statistics come out, which they do monthly, there's always a lot of attention around them because you can extrapolate from those to see what's going on in the housing market at large. And of course, in turn, that has things that you can read into that about the economy. And on the latest figures, the news is that total mortgage lending has fallen from 17.5 billion to 16.7 billion. And that is largely because of a decline in buy-to-let lending. In fact, lending to landlords has fallen over this period by 40%, which is pretty big. And that's been offset partially by increased lending to homeowners. So a couple of things to take from this. The first one is I think that's probably broadly correct, like directionally from the things that I've been seeing. I think some landlords definitely have been either paying down mortgages or selling off properties. And this is what the government wanted. They wanted to decrease buy-to-let activity, kind of damp that down, and they wanted to increase access to the market for first-time buyers especially. So that all seems to be working. What I think possibly is not correct, and this is where there's an interesting kind of subtle point in there, is the magnitude of the change. So Nationwide has reported that lending to landlords has fallen by 40%. But bear in mind, this is only Nationwide's own figures. This is only based on the lending that Nationwide itself has done. Nationwide is one of the biggest mortgage lenders in the country, but up until last week, they did not lend to limited companies. As we know from previous episodes, up to 80% of new mortgage applications are for landlords buying in limited companies. Therefore, the buy-to-let market has gone through a massive transition. Everyone's now buying in companies. Nationwide hasn't had any part of that. So it's no surprise that their lending volume to landlords has fallen. And that, of course, is why they've decided to go into the buy-to-let market. So I think it's an interesting story. I think the conclusions are probably broadly correct, but there's a reminder in there to be careful about data sources. The result you get can depend massively on how you measure things, and this is a really clear-cut example of that because their lending has been so concentrated in one area that's got a lot less popular.
I think you make a fantastic point there about the headlines being misleading. 40% drop in landlord lending sounds devastating, doesn't it? Sounds like the market's completely been decimated. And yes, the market has been hurt, but as you pointed out, Rob, they've not been lending in the limited company market, so it's going to fall by that much. The other thing it doesn't account for, and this is where you have to be careful when it's just one lender reporting their data, no matter how big they are, is the impact of overseas investors. That's a huge driver of the UK property market, one that doesn't get talked about a lot. We have talked about it before in our secret property boom episode, which we will link to in the show notes because I think it ties in so nicely with this story. But there are multiple factors making up the UK property market, and one company reporting their data may not tell you the whole picture. And with this news story, that's certainly the case. But still, interesting to look at it, but more interested to dig into it sometimes.
Yeah, I think you've got a great point, Rob, about the overseas investors. And in fact, cash buyers in general tend not to get accounted for by the figures because mortgage lenders have got the ability to see what's going on quite quickly. You can get their data and extrapolate from that. But cash buyers, I can't remember what percentage of the market cash buyers are, but it's a lot higher than you'd think. And you tend not to learn anything about that until the land registry data comes out, which is delayed by quite a number of months. So that data is always lagging. So you're quite right. You've got to be aware that you're only looking at part of the picture here. And as overseas buyers become a bigger driver of the market, which they have done, as we talked about in that episode you mentioned, that is even more the case.
So no budget, but we've still managed to be semi-interesting. Not bad, Rob. Well done.
All right, let's see if we can keep that up as we move into our topic this week, things we've changed our minds about. So we've been doing this podcast thing for about 4.5 years or so. Over that time, we've said a lot of things, and some of those things we've changed our minds about. Sometimes that's because circumstances have changed. The world that we were podcasting about back in episode 1 was very different from what it is in episode 245. In other ways, our thinking has just matured because we've learned a lot from doing this as well. So some things we've just straight out changed our mind about. So today we're going to dig into 3 of those things, see how our mind has changed, and see what lessons you can learn from that, other than don't listen to Rob and Rob too much.
So let's get going, Rob. And as I'm leading us in, I'll start with something that you've changed your mind about first.
The holy grail is high yield and high growth. If you can achieve that, then you're laughing. And they're often talked about those two as if they're mutually exclusive, but it doesn't have to be the case. High yield and high growth being diametrically opposed, that doesn't have to be the case. And if you can get both, then you're in a very good position indeed.
Okay, so my opinion back then was that you wanted to get growth and yield together. Greedy old Rob D, wanting growth and yield. Let's have a listen back, Rob, to what you had to say back then.
If you're using leverage, capital growth has the potential to have a dramatic impact on your portfolio over the long term. 1% capital growth above average or £100 extra in revenue every month. The £100 might sound quite tempting now, but over the long term, that 1% growth every year will make a dramatic impact to your wealth. Properties that you target for growth are in good areas. We're talking about prime city locations here. We're not talking about, rundown areas that can deliver high yields. These are areas that are going to have and attract good quality tenants. Fingers crossed, that's the theory anyway. There's plenty in favour of, targeting capital growth, and you also don't get taxed on your paper profits as you go along.
Okay, so I was trying to get growth and yield together. Rob, you were quite heavily coming down in favour of growth as the thing to focus on and just treat anything else as a bonus. My thinking has changed somewhat, but I'm guessing that yours has actually stayed pretty consistent.
It has and it hasn't, because I was thinking from one point of view, which is the long-term property investor. And that was the mindset I had when we recorded that podcast. So I actually have changed my mind, because if you're in it for the short term, let's say you're coming up to retirement in 2 or 3 years and you need an income, growth just isn't going to be enough for you. You need income now, so you may need to turn to HMOs, you may need to turn to a holiday let strategy, or whatever it may be, whereas growth isn't going to do it for you. So actually, I have changed my mind, sort of. I don't believe it's right for everybody. I believe it's the more important thing for the long-term property investor, because that's where the real wealth is made, and I still very much hold that true, and I think anybody who invested in London over the last 5 years has made a lot more from their capital growth than they have their rent. However, I do believe there's very much a place for an income strategy, and that growth isn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think to build on that, where I've changed my mind is that I thought, and I was saying there, that you can get both together. You can find a property that's got great growth potential and the yield is good as well. I now think that you've got to be far more conscious about which one is important to you and to optimize for that and treat the other as a bonus if you get it. Now, I think there's a couple of reasons why I've changed my mind on this. The first is probably being more aware of the importance of planning and going into property with a clear plan and strategy. I've always been aware of that to an extent, but as a result of everything we've done on the podcast and all the people we've met and we've talked to, it's just become abundantly clear how critical that is. So you can't just go and buy what you think is a good property. You need to be buying a property with a reason, because you want to accomplish a particular thing. At the broadest possible level, it's because you either want income now, or you want wealth later. Of course, there's far more subtlety to it than that, but broadly speaking, that's your first decision, and so that's going to determine the type of property that you buy. Also, I think because the market has moved on so much over the last few years, I think it's much harder to get a property that will deliver both things for you. So the properties that have got the best growth potential tend now to be more expensive than they were because the market's picked up so much, and therefore they will tend not to be so high yielding. And the high yielding properties, you might have in the past been able to get them at depressed prices because the market was in a bit of a funk, but now the market's stabilized, there aren't that many bargains out there. It's hard to find properties that have got growth potential and are yielding well. It's more the case that if you're looking for yield, then you're looking for traditionally high yielding properties, that being HMOs, properties in far cheaper areas, maybe in LHA areas, and those properties tend not to have the growth potential. So I think we've both had a bit of a shift there. Not a huge mind change, but maybe our positions just getting a bit more nuanced over time.
Yeah, I think the final point I'd make on this is a lot of people are investing in the north right now, and understandably so, because the numbers just don't work in London and the southeast. But the difference of income between a property that gives you a 6% return or an 8% return actually is nominal. And it's not the type of money that's going to change your life at all, really. It's, yeah, of course, if you can have more, why not take it? But if that 8% yield property is in an area that you don't expect any capital growth, and the 6% property is in an area that you do expect capital growth, well then, for me, it's a no-brainer. That 2% drop for the potential of much more growth will always win out for me every single time. So it really does depend on your position, where you're at. There is no right answer for everybody. If you're long-term, I still stick very much with growth because that's where the real wealth is made. But if you're shorter term, you have to adapt and you have to go after income now. So we started with quite a biggie there. We've done yield versus capital growth. But we're not going easy on ourselves now because we're getting into another big debate, which is interest only versus capital repayment mortgages. Again, people have real passionate views on this, and Rob and I are no different. We've talked about this in the past. So Rob, I've been particularly passionate on this point, but let's hear your more measured view first.
My personal opinion is that there's very rarely an argument for a repayment mortgage. Interest-only mortgages are the ones that are used in the vast majority of investments. The reasons for that, I think my reasons for going interest only are that it's more tax efficient because you can offset all the interest portion of your mortgage against tax. And it also gives you a lot more flexibility.
Okay, measured is all well and good, but I want to hear your stronger opinion, Rob. Let's have a listen to what you had to say about this subject.
I'm going to be a bit more extreme, Rob. I think you're bonkers if you go for a repayment mortgage. Not only are you hurting your cash flow, but you're not utilising one of the biggest tools in property investment, which is inflation. But I think interest only, if you're taking a long-term strategy with regards to property, is absolutely the way to go.
All right, so I've changed my mind about this one for some situations. So I still think that in the vast majority of cases, interest only is the way to go. It makes sense for loads of reasons, some of which we talked about in those clips there. However, I think where I've changed my mind is that I've come to realise that there's no one-size-fits-all in property. And even though interest only is in pounds and pence terms, almost always, I would say, if you do it sensibly, almost always the right way to go, you will end up being better off at the end of it. That's not the only motivation. People come into property with different attitudes, different beliefs, different concerns, wanting different things. And it might be the case that some people, all they want to do is be debt-free as quickly as possible. And if that's the case, say they've got a plan that they want to buy a couple of properties now with the cash that they've got, then overpay on those as quickly as possible. And then they know in 10 years' time, by the time they finish work, they will have paid those debts off, and they'll have those two properties free and clear, which will produce enough income for them to do what they want to do, maybe to top up their pension or whatever. If that's the case, then, well, actually, an interest-only mortgage would still work perfectly well because they could just save up the excess income and make overpayments at the end or whenever makes the most sense for them. And if they change their mind about their strategy at any point, then it's easier for them to do so. They've got more flexibility. But psychology is a big part of property, as it is with everything. And if they would feel far more comfortable having a repayment mortgage, then fine. So be it. It doesn't particularly matter if they're worse off as a result, because it gives them the comfort that they need. And they know that following this plan will get them to where they want to be. They'd far rather have that certainty. Maybe they think that if they've got the money in the bank, they've got the extra rental income, they couldn't be certain enough that they would save it up and not go and spend it on something else. So I still think that interest-only mortgages by far make more sense. But I'm just more aware now than I was, I think, of all the different kind of mindsets that people come into property with. And if someone's got a rock solid plan and they know that a repayment mortgage will make them feel happier and they'll still get to where they want to be with more certainty, then I'm not going to stop them from doing that.
Wrong. No, actually, I've changed my mind too. You're right, Rob. The case still stands for what I put across. That is the logical thing to do. The numbers tell you what I've suggested. It's the right thing. However, we're not robots. And maybe as we're maturing, we're becoming a little bit more relaxed. But I do believe that there's a strategy for everyone. And paying down your mortgage, it's not a disaster. It's not like you're going to ruin property investment for yourself, and make yourself poor. If your mindset is you want to get rid of debt, then that's cool. Is there a slightly more optimal way of investing? Yes. But if you're going to find property investment a little bit easier to get your head round and help you push forward, then maybe you kick off with the mindset that you will pay your debt down, but then change your mind and go the interest-only model in the future once you've got that comfort. Who knows? The logical way forward is the way I explained, but like we see with the last point, there's always different scenarios and different starting points for everybody. And in some cases, it may actually make sense to pay down your debt. But on the whole, I believe I haven't quite changed my mind. I'm just not as passionate as I was before. But one thing that people do hope you've changed your mind on, Rob, well, certainly a town full of people hope you've changed your mind about, is Burnley.
Sorry, people of Burnley. I've picked on it because it can so easily look like a good investment. And I've actually seen on a couple of message boards people who've just kind of discovered it and think that it sounds amazing and almost too good to be true. And so they've asked for people's opinions, then everyone's put them straight. The reason it sounds so good is I actually went on Rightmove to check this. You can buy a 2-bedroom house near the station and near all the shops for £15,000. So even if it was a bit of a wreck, even if you doubled that spend with the refurb and you ended up spending £30,000, you can still, again, I've checked, you can rent it out at the LHA rate of £85 a week, and you can end up making a gross yield of nearly 15%, which is insanely high.
Do you still need to apologise to these people, Rob? Well, I think you do, actually, because you've slagged off a whole town. So even if you've changed your mind, I still think we need a public apology.
Well, all right, maybe. But let's first of all hear what you had to say, because I think you've got an entire region to apologise to.
I'm going for a big area. So we're really peeing a lot of people off with this one, the North East. And actually, Newcastle is probably the exception to this rule. But generally, pretty much the majority of other areas in the North East have been hit hard, and hit harder really than anywhere else compared to any other region economically. Oopsie.
Yeah.
There's a few more people in the North East, isn't there?
Yeah, I think in terms of sheer numbers, you could be in more trouble than me here. Okay, maybe we've both got some strategic backpedaling to do on this. I've gone first on a couple of these, Rob, so I'll let you have a go first at this.
People of the North East, I apologise to you and your families and your wonderful towns and villages. Yes, I've changed my mind. I actually believe when I recorded that point of view a few years ago that I was right to say not to invest in the North East, because it's played out that there's not been a lot of growth there and not much has happened, even though actually I did buy a property in the North East. And funnily enough, conflicting with everything I've said before, it's yielding very nicely for me. But I do believe in the next few years there's a place for people investing in the long term to look to the North East for capital growth potential. Now, I'm not rushing in, and I don't expect to see any growth in the next few years, but if you're investing in the Midlands and the Northwest, which is where I'm investing, and I think you probably should be investing right now because there's plenty of growth opportunity there, that's probably going to happen a little bit sooner. The North East will have its day too. It's just further behind in the cycle, but eventually it will play out. Now, a strong word of warning, I am only looking at, in the next few years, to potentially start investing in the very best areas. So the best commuter towns, the best commuter villages, and the best areas within city centres. I am not looking to go to secondary locations because it's so well priced at the moment that you simply don't need to go to these secondary areas to get yield. There's yield in the best areas now. The property that I mentioned before is bang in the city centre of Sunderland. It's like a penthouse apartment. It will be one of the first properties to go up from a capital growth point of view because it's one of the best apartments in the city. So that's the type of approach you should take if you start to look there. I think it's a little bit early still, but one to keep an eye on.
That links really nicely into the reason that I need to, yes, apologise to Burnley. I'm sorry, people of Burnley. I've had quite a few emails about this now, so you can stop. I am going to apologise. But the point that I was making with Burnley, I wasn't trying to pick on it specifically. I was using it to illustrate a point, and it's quite a similar point to what you were saying just then, Rob. What I was trying to do was warn people off really, really cheap property. People see properties going dirt cheap, especially in the north. If you're from London or the southeast, you look at the prices and you go, oh my God, that's incredible. You can get a house for 30 grand. But there's more to that than meets the eye. You might struggle to let it. There's all kinds of problems with that. So I was choosing Burnley as an example of somewhere where very cheap housing is available, and it might not be as good an investment as you think it is if you're completely new to that market. What I should have said at the time but didn't was that there are areas of Burnley and there are areas of most towns where the prices are not so cheap. The yield appears to not be as strong, but they're better overall investments, both because they're going to be far easier to manage, the tenants are going to be better, you're going to have far less aggro along the way, you're going to have fewer voids, but also because of the point that Rob just made, the better areas are going to see growth first and they're going to see more growth overall. Specifically on Burnley, as it happens, things have actually changed. It's had a fair bit of investment. It's also got a new train link that links it to Manchester. So now you can travel direct from Burnley to Manchester. It takes about an hour. Previously, you couldn't do that. And as prices go up in Manchester, as they have been doing, people are going to start looking further afield in terms of something that they can afford. They're going to be willing to commute greater distances, and Burnley is now a lot more commutable than it was. So there is now a stronger investment case for Burnley in particular, and I am sorry for singling it out, but the overall point still stands. When you are going to secondary areas, go for the very best locations. We've said it lots of times on the podcast now, but it's really important. We still see people making this mistake. Don't do it. Don't get seduced by the very cheapest prices.
Yeah, so Burnley, we're in your corner, and we don't like that pesky Blackburn. We're with you. I've just Googled, that's their main rival. Sorry, Blackburn, but we probably got less listener numbers there, so Burnley. Right, okay. Now I'm going to get the emails.
Well, if you do get lots of emails from angry Blackburners, Rob, I've got a resource of the week coming up that's going to help you deal with those. But before we do that, we always make time in the show to acknowledge a 5-star review.
We do, so thank you to these wonderful people. First up, Wesley92 says, I've been listening to Rob and Rob for the last 3 months, working my way through 200 plus episodes, and I can honestly say I'm amazed at the amount of useful content these two have produced. And that's all completely free. Booked to go to my first meetup next month, and I'm looking to close on my first buy-to-let next month. Cheers, Rob and Rob. Amazing, Wesley. Well done. Let's squeeze one more in, Rob. We've got a review from Raymond, and Raymond says, I wish there was more stars to give. I've been a passive property investor for around 8 years now and never really got my affairs in order. Thanks to this podcast, I am now on a mission to get my properties, my tax affairs, and everything in between in order, and expand my portfolio in a savvy manner. If I make it to review of the week, please thank Raymond Caldwell for recommending it in the first place. Please keep up the inspiring work, guys. Guildwell. Well, thank you, Guildwell. Thank you, Raymond, for spreading the good word of the property podcast.
Okay, so resource of the week time. Rob, I think this one is just for you. The headline on the page for Loom, which is what we're recommending this week, is faster than typing. Have you signed up yet?
I know. I did a giddy little yay when I looked at this. It looks absolutely awesome. Tell me more. Tell everyone more.
Yeah, this is really cool. I think we've shared something similar in the past, but this is the slickest version I've seen. So this is a way of recording really quick little screen share videos. So if you want to explain to someone how to do something, you can type a big long thing about it, or you can just show them. So you can just click a button, record a quick video of you doing something on your screen and talking over the top of it. and then send them that video. What Loom does is it's done that as a Chrome plugin. So it's just a single button to start and a single button to stop. It's really, really quick and easy. It also integrates with Gmail. So if you get an email from someone and you want to reply with a video, because it's quicker than typing something out, you can just do that from within your email. It's really, really seamless. So this is great if you've got a virtual assistant and you want to explain how to do something, but it comes in useful for all kinds of things. I actually don't mind typing. I quite like writing, but I still recently, since I found this, I've been using this a lot because I just find it way quicker and clearer to get a point across. So it's called Loom. It's useloom.com. And I think a lot of people could find this to be a major time saver.
Yes, I will be going to the show notes, which are at thepropertyhub.net/changed. And of course, you can find that link and all the other links we've mentioned in the podcast on that URL too.
Okay, that just about wraps it up for this episode. I hope even though we've been doing a lot of backpedaling today, you will still think that it's worth listening to next week's episode. Well, you should. We've got a really good one coming up. We're going to be talking about the North-South divide, the imbalances in the economy between the North and the South, what that means for the country in general, and of course, what that means for property investment in particular. So that's coming up next Thursday.
And why Northerners are generally superior human beings.
Who's written the notes for this one?
Oh, maybe a little bit more balanced than that.
Yep, hopefully so. But you're going to have to tune in next Thursday to see. And in the meantime, you can hear Ask Rob and Rob, where we answer another listener question on Tuesday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.